is there any flexibility in what's on and not the list? We understand, for example, right next door to here is the Conservatorium of Music that has a strategic interest in property that council owns at the moment. Is there a mechanism for people to put their case or otherwise in that regard?
Yes, in fact, I mentioned the housing land. I had already identified that because of my particular interest and background in housing and community housing. But on the night of when that paper went to the council meeting, in the same way that our opera singer came forward to utilise that space, this person came forward and identified that as land that would be useful for community housing, and another block was useful for a community centre, which had an Alzheimer's support service attached to it. So people can raise issues. They can do the normal work through the bureaucracy. But I am the council. I have replaced the elected representatives, and people can still get to me if they want to. I mean that in the contact me in that sense. Of course. And so, for example, the cause you're referring to, and I know you have a personal interest in that area of the arts. They can come to a council meeting and make the case, or they can contact me directly and make the case. But there is a limit to how much we can take off the table, because our projections with a 15% rate increase still mean that the surpluses over 10 years are only 113 million, and they're going down at the end of that 10 years because wages are increasing faster than rates at the moment, and that could continue. So asset sales is another way of reducing that debt level from its 565 million. Now, because interest rates are low, what I can say, without going into too much detail, the $100 million is less than 1% interest. Now, people my age just can't even believe that sort of interest level. I mean, I was buying a house at the time when they were 15, 16%. But even in your lifetime, you would have seen them at 7 or 8, 9. So if interest rates increase over the next 5 years, back up into the 2 or 3 or 4%, that becomes a very significant amount of money on the budget.
So that, therefore, the necessity to pay down debt.
Yes, we've got to pay down some debt as best as we can, and those lenders who are assessing our overall viability realise that we're vulnerable to that change, and they want to see the debt reduced as well, even though they lend it.
There's, I mean, we've asked previously about other operational assets like water and so on. You've said that's off the table.
Water and sewage, it was raised with me again this week, and I won't go into the details of who raised it, but it makes a very big financial contribution to the organisation. And so it's like selling one of your cash cows. Yes, it could generate multi-billion dollars. There's a couple of questions. Would the community trust the council with billions of dollars at the moment? I don't think so. Possibly a state government could tie it up in some sort of a trust, but I don't think the community wants the state government controlling their asset either. So it's quite a complex sort of question, but it's certainly not something that I have seriously looked at or support. It may be something that gets into the political landscape at some point in time, and a debate might occur, but I certainly am satisfied that the best thing at the moment is to have the revenue that's guaranteed and not to create another problem or a diversion or an industrial fight either as well.
On to some specific projects, the regional library, which has had a rate levy put on it for many years in Gosford and has attracted state and I believe federal funding. Is that being treated specially, and is that going to go ahead?
It is being treated differently, specially, and I'm trying to make it go ahead.
Right. Well, that's a quick answer to that. With the redundancies, you mentioned there's 300 odd staff and perhaps more in the future. As far as corporate knowledge is concerned, are you worried that the people that put their hand up sometimes for redundancies or otherwise we lose some competence in the organisation, a sort of core competence in the organisation?
Very worried.
How do you deal with that?
Yeah, very worried. And I referred a while ago to the fact that further cuts on top of that run the risk of doing irreparable damage to the organisation, and that's one of the factors that are in that view or behind that viewpoint. First of all, it's a voluntary redundancy program, but doesn't mean we will accept every offer. So there is a strategic lens put over the whole project. And yes, you don't want. Often there's two types of people who may want a voluntary redundancy. One is clearly people getting near the end of their working life and approaching retirement and walking out with an extra 30 or 40 weeks pay is quite attractive. The other are people often who are confident that they can get employment when they leave. And if you can go to a new job with 30 or 40 weeks pay in your pocket, that's not a bad option. So yes, we're very mindful of making sure that we don't let people go that we think are essential and can't easily be replaced.
On to other things as far as income generation concerned. Are you open to other ways of raising income as other councils do, whether it's small or large, parking fees, Airbnb taxes, or Airbnb levies, pet levies and those sort of things? Are they something that the council might look for?
Look, yes, in general. The first 3 months, it's been a bit like running downhill and having to get the next foot out before you fall over. I don't want to complain or whinge. I mean, Mr. Hart and I are well paid, and we're experienced. But it's been quite tough, and there hasn't been a lot of time for what you might call discretionary perspectives. As I mentioned to you, we were hanging out for $100 million loan, and how sad is it that we were excited to get a $100 million loan? I mean, that's really tragic. I mean, we shouldn't have been in this space at all. But anyway, other income generating things are something that you always look at. I've probably got enough bad tasting sandwich out there at the moment with the rate increase without incurring more. But I think one of the big areas of expense here is providing services to visitors. And we don't want to deter visitors because that's a big part of our economy. But beach parking, for example, is something that in most places people pay for. And in the northern beaches, in Warringah and then northern beaches, in fact, my first decision at my first council meeting when they merged was that I announced the extension of the beach parking permits. They'd be recognised in all the three areas from the individual councils. And one of the local members, now the Minister for Health, Brad Hazzard, called me the next day and said, "You don't have to do anything else." People are so happy about that.
It's a lovely dividend, yes.
But the permits were given with rate notices. Basically in Warringah, I think it was 2 permits provided to your rate notice. And there's a side issue there. Some people started to sell them and whatever. But nevertheless, so residents didn't have to pay to go to the beach and park at the beach. And visitors did.
Well, we had 200,000 people reportedly from Surf Life Saving Central Coast over the Australia Day extended long weekend on our beaches. And
I'm not surprised.
We had a lot of chaos all over the beach.
There is a bit of work to be done, but I did decide yesterday that I would ask for this to be looked at. So you've got a scoop.
Oh, there we go.
I am going to ask the question of a report on viability of a beach parking paid system with adequate protections for residents that they don't have to pay. Then you've got the issue of landlords who don't live here, they get they pay the rates, and what about their tenants? So there's quite a few. It's not as simple as it sounds, but I expect there'd be strong community support here for us recovering a bit of the cost of providing services at the beaches. We provide the lifeguards, we clean the rubbish, we clean the beaches, whatever. I think there'd be quite a lot of support for trying to attract some of that from the visitors without killing the goose that lays the golden tourist egg.
And Airbnb, so-called Airbnb levies,
I've not even thought about that. I don't know much about them, by the way, or what's happening there. That may be something that down the line people are going to have a look at, but I don't know enough about that. But the parking one's a pretty standard one and probably not a bad place to start. Although there'll be some people say, well, that's the first step. The next step will be charging us to park in the CBD. Well, it's not on my plan, but that will be a fair and understandable concern. I think other sources of revenue would be good, and we should look at it.
Is there anything else you'd like to say to the listeners and to the readers? We'll send this to the journalists too to write that scoop story among other things.
Look, thank you for the chance to communicate. I think a big part of this whole issue with the rates is it's a real communication challenge. And as I say, for a third of the people of the 50 people who turned up last night to have read the 30-day report, I was a bit shocked at, to be frank. So I just would encourage people to try and access some information before they get into the ring. I do think they're entitled to be angry, pissed off, to be frank. I would be. The question is what you do with that anger. And my report finishes, the latest 3-monthly report says take the anger to the ballot box where it belongs.
Which brings us on, I suppose, to councillors and some of the councillors that have spoken to us and some that do in the future. And onto your referendum about a recommendation or an option for a smaller council to make it more manageable. What do you think about that, the council as a whole, as far as what previous councillors have said, and also what the qualities of the sort of councillors that you would recommend come up to the September elections?
I think 15 people was always going to be too big. That was the model the state government chose at the time of mergers. Their agenda would have been to try and make the merged communities feel still represented. And I understand that was a legitimate concern at that time. More experienced people in running organisations and councils shook their head and thought that's going to be a problem. It has been in a number of places, and this place it clearly was. If people watching now haven't watched a council meeting, you can go into the archives, and it won't take you very long to get a feel for what the dynamic was. And I think that large number contributed to that. It wasn't a sole cause, but it contributed to it. If you look at the comments that are being made so far, I mean, the mayor is on the record, former mayor, is saying that she relied on the advice of the public servants and was misled. Well, I'm sorry, the job requires more than that. A lot more than that, and you know, if you didn't know how to get the information from the organisation, then you weren't doing your job. And a quick call to some of your mayoral colleagues around the place might have helped you there. And it's clear that that group felt under attack and repelled any advice from the other side. Although the other side, in my view, acted in a way that wasn't really conducive to forming a collaborative working environment. And I watched with great interest your last interview with former councillor Greg Best, and he waved around a list many times to you of 70,000, or was it 70 resolutions or whatever. And I thought, well, yeah, okay, so you were the council's leading resolutionary, but resolutions weren't being effective, so why did you continue with that strategy when it wasn't working? It was clear that wasn't working. And what was required was an approach of sort of trying to reach across the aisle. And I've met with all the former councillors, and many of them are, on both sides are quite nice, good people. You know, where was the effort to try and form some sort of a more collaborative approach? Councillor Best seemed very comfortable in an adversarial attack mode. I think he had probably hoped his side would win originally the mayoralty when. And I gather there's a bit of politics went on at the time, and someone changed their vote at the last minute and they felt let down, and maybe it was antagonistic from the beginning because of that. But former Councillor Best, I think, had a bit to do with the demonstration last night, and I thought, well, that's a bit of a cheek. And he came to the council meeting last night after the demonstration to tell me about the hardship that would be brought upon low-income people in Wyong, notwithstanding the fact that their rates are going to go down. But I finally interrupted him and said, well, you brought in a rate increase for these same people before the merger. And he seemed surprised, and I think his response was, that's a fair question. I brought him back to it another time. So there's a fair bit of politics and maybe even a little bit of hypocrisy here going on, and I think the public is sick of it. The real challenge for them is going to be how to work out, you know, who to put in next time. And I don't have an answer for that. That is going to be a real challenge. I'd encourage people to think about organising for them not to come back. I did that in Warringah Council and got attacked for it. Maybe I stepped over the line of an administrator, but it was clear that some of them were going to come back to fight. In fact, I've heard Councillor Best on a radio interview saying after I sacked the former general manager, the first thing he did when he got back was going to demand an inquiry into this and that. Well, that's indicative of someone who hasn't changed their modus operandi. So whether people like him or the former mayor who still don't think they had anything to do with it, they should come back. The community's out there with their baseball bats, like, to use the whole, I think it was Paul Keating who made that expression, but not literally, of course. Yeah, I think the community's angry, but they will have a real dilemma working out how to vote and who to vote for. I think the reduced council size eventually will help, but that's not going to happen until 23-24.
And the perennial question here is the idea of a popularly elected mayor. Would that help the dynamics of a council such as
Good
this?
question. In fact, I put a referendum in Warringah for a popularly elected mayor, and I'm now told that that's one of the few places where it's actually worked successfully. That's not because of me, that's just as it's turned out. And my first thinking here was that maybe a popularly elected mayor would help. I talked to the head of the Office of Local Government about it, and he said most of the councils that he's now, or on his plate in terms of having trouble, are where a popularly elected mayor doesn't have the support on the floor of council. The popularly elected mayor feels they have a mandate. The councillors have the numbers and they feel they have a mandate. So it's a bit like a microcosm of American politics with the Senate. But anyway, so I've backed off that. I'm influenced by his advice that it's often not working and is not a guarantee. So,
although we understand, well, we know that Wyong Council previously did have a resolution or a referendum on a popularly elected mayor, and it passed to 60% or something.
They usually do. Yep, they usually do.
Yep.
And resolutions to get rid of wards usually fail. So.